Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a place that smells like beeswax, freshly baked rye, and something lightly fermented. Yes, we're headed into a medieval convent. But not just any convent. This one hums with activity. Not just prayers and psalms, but the gentle clatter of wooden casks, the glug-glug of bubbling wort, and the muted laughter of women in habits, elbow deep in mash. Welcome to the world of beer brewing nuns. You're standing just outside the gates of a stone-walled convent somewhere in 12th century Germany. The fog is thick, the grass damp underfoot, and there's a small line of villagers waiting at the side gate, jugs in hand. They're not here for prayer. They want the good stuff, the ale brewed by Sister Matilda and her quietly formidable crew of fermentation experts. You probably wouldn't last a day here, to be honest. The schedule alone, midnight prayers, 3 a.m. brewing prep, hours of physical labor, would make your modern circadian rhythm shriek. But don't worry, you're not here to work. Just observe, maybe sniff around the brewing room, maybe sneak a taste. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, say a hammock in the Philippines or a rainy Scottish village, post your location and local time in the comments. It's always such a delight seeing how far this sleepy little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open a thick wooden door and step into the convent courtyard. It's early, just before the bells toll for lauds. The air is thick with dew, and two sisters are already moving casks toward a shed at the back. No one's rushing. Everything here flows with the same slow certainty as Gregorian chant. Inside the convent walls, life is regulated by time, prayer, and surprisingly, brewing cycles. This isn't a side hustle. Brewing is woven into the spiritual fabric of the place. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs many monastic communities, encourages self-sufficiency. And that includes making drinkable and sometimes delightful ale. Water? Dubious. Beer? Safer. As you walk past the chapel, you can smell it. The brew room. It's not a formal term, but fits. A long, warm space with soot-blackened rafters, clay floors, and a perpetual hiss of boiling mash. Sister Adelheid is already stirring a thick, golden mixture with a paddle taller than you. She grunts a hello without looking up. You might think it's strange, nuns brewing beer, but in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just common. It was expected. In many convents across Europe, women were the primary brewers, not in secret or shame, but proudly, often under the blessing of local clergy. After all, beer wasn't a sinful pleasure. It was a necessity. Some recipes were simple, barely more than malted grain and lukewarm hope. Others were surprisingly sophisticated, using herbs like yarrow or sweet gale, well before hops took center stage. And yes, these nuns knew their stuff. Many had inherited brewing knowledge from older sisters, who'd learned it from the sisters before them. Brewing was passed down like hymns. What you'll notice first in this world is the rhythm. Brewing isn't rushed. Everything has a place in the day. You help carry a basket of dried herbs to the cool cellar. Along the way, you pass a scriptorium where another sister is copying a prayer book. She looks up and smiles, then glances at the herbs and raises an eyebrow. She knows what's really fueling this place. There's a quiet confidence among these women. You get the sense that this isn't just about making beer, it's about making community. Brewing provides income for the convent, yes, but it also gives the sisters a reason to interact with the world beyond the walls. Traders, peasants, even passing nobility. Everyone comes by for a cask or two. The nuns don't gossip, of course, but they do listen. Carefully. Historians still argue whether the sisters received formal training in brewing science or simply perfected it through intuition. There are no detailed manuals left behind, just recipe fragments, obscure Latin references, and the occasional marginal doodle of a barrel with legs. One odd little detail, Some nuns brewed under the protection of patron saints of beer. Yes, those existed. Saint Bridget of Kildare, for example, was said to have turned bathwater into ale. Miraculous? Sure, but also highly convenient. As the sun begins to rise, the convent comes alive. Bells ring, geese honk somewhere near the garden, and a sister gently nudges you toward a wooden bench by the wall. Breakfast is thin porridge, a crust of rye, and, yes, a cup of weak, warm beer. Not bad. A little nutty. You nod approvingly. Sister Hildegard raises an eyebrow, clearly amused. And there's that warmth again, not just from the cup, but from the place. It's hard to say whether it's the hops or the harmony that's calming your nerves. Probably both. You lean back, watching the morning mist lift off the brewing yard. The sisters move quietly, but with purpose. You can't help but think, maybe they're onto something. Maybe the secret to peace isn't silence or seclusion, but a good brew shared among friends. You're barely finished with your breakfast when the second bell tolls. Tears, the third hour. Time for prayer. But don't worry, you're not expected to chant. You quietly trail behind a few sisters headed to the chapel. But before you step inside, something stops you. A faint, earthy sweetness riding the breeze. Malt, still warm from the mash tun. You veer left instead, toward the broom again, where the real action is picking up. The sisters have their sleeves rolled up, habits tucked for practicality, and feet firmly planted among clay jugs, wooden paddles, and great iron kettles that hiss and spit like they have opinions. You slip into a shadowy corner and watch. It's meditative, almost like a dance. Measured movements, patient stirring, glances exchanged like incantations. This is where the sacred meets the surprisingly sticky. Brewing was just one part of nuns' many duties, but it was one of the most involved, most physical, and, ironically, most worldly. Because while prayers went upward, beer flowed outward. It nourished guests, sick wards, travelers, pilgrims, and of course the sisters themselves. And it was all woven into the fabric of daily convent life. After the morning prayers, brewing prep began. Grains soaked, malt dried, water hauled, fires lit. The tools were rustic. Wooden shovels for grain turning, great copper kettles for boiling, long ladles for transferring the mash. You wonder briefly how anyone kept their wimples clean in here. Spoiler, they didn't. The grain used, usually barley, came from convent lands or donations. Sometimes wheat, sometimes rye. Occasionally, the sisters would sneak in roasted roots or petals to give their ale a little extra something. Historians still argue whether these additions were intentional flavor choices or just whatever was lying around. Either way, it worked. And of course, hops. Though not universal in early brewing, hops gradually became the preferred bittering and preserving agent. The sisters were among the early adopters. They grew them in tidy rows along the convent walls, long vines climbing wooden poles like sleepy green serpents. Hops didn't just make beer taste better. They made it last longer, which meant you could sell it farther from the barrel. You follow Sister Cunigund, who's been brewing here for, allegedly, 30 years, as she ladles hot wort into a smaller wooden vat. She hands you a mug with a smirk. "Don't drink it," she mutters. "Not yet." You obey. The warm, cloudy liquid smells like oatmeal and secrets. They'll cool it slowly, add yeast, sometimes unknowingly carried in the air, sometimes from a well-worn wooden spoon that just seems to make better beer. You're not about to argue with sacred utensils. Everything is done in reverent silence, not because of any strict vow, but because Sister Cunigund's glare is more effective than the Inquisition. She points to a cracked tile on the floor. Last one who talked dropped a cask. Enough said. In between stirring and cooling, the sisters go about other chores. You watch Sister Agnes carefully copying accounts into a ledger. Ingredients, dates, batch notes, and what appears to be a customer list. Interesting. You catch names. A merchant, a reeve, even a visiting nobleman. Everyone wants the Nun Brewed ale. It's reliable, clean, and, according to whispers, blessed. Whether or not that's true, the barrels move quickly. There's no marketing department here, but word spreads. The Nuns Ale isn't just tolerable. It's good. And not just in your dusty cupboard. It's edible, so it's fine medieval sense. It's genuinely satisfying. Crisp, slightly herbal, a little cloudy, but consistent. That's no small feat in a time when most people drank beer because the water might literally kill them. A fringe detail you notice? They chant while brewing, not loudly, not even in full hymns. Just soft fragments of psalms under their breath. Some scholars believe this was a kind of timing device, like singing a song while you wash your hands. Others argue it was just comforting, a kind of sensory rhythm to match the physical one. Either way, it makes the air shimmer a little. You realize this is the heart of the operation. Brewing wasn't a novelty. It was devotion in disguise. The patience it required, the careful boiling, waiting, fermenting, mirrored the contemplative rhythm of convent life. The process was slow, repetitive, and oddly meditative, like praying with your hands. And it wasn't just practical. Brewing kept the convent alive, literally and economically. Many convents operated as charitable centers, feeding the poor, healing the sick. But charity required funding, and ale was one of the few goods convents could legally sell, especially to those outside the walls. You follow Sister Cunigund out to the storage cellar, cool, musty, and dimly lit with little candles that make everything glow like a Rembrandt. The shelves are stacked with sealed clay jugs and fat wooden barrels marked with dates and names. You notice a symbol scratched into each, usually a cross or a simple sheaf of barley. Branding medieval style. "Watch your head," she says, just as you nearly collide with a hanging sack of dried herbs. The aroma hits you, juniper maybe, or mugwort. Something sharp and sweet. Not all batches used hops. Some of the older recipes still used gruit, a mixture of herbs and flowers for bitterness and preservation. The flavors were wilder, less stable, but richer. Cunigund grunts, apparently having watched you sniff the sack like an overexcited truffle pig. "That one's for the next feast day," she says. "Pilgrim strength." You're not sure what that means, but you're 90% sure it involves hallucinations. And just as you're about to ask, the bells ring again. Sext. Noon. Time to stop and eat. But not for you. You linger in the cellar, watching a novice nun carefully carve the date into the side of a new cask with a tiny knife. The wood creaks. Dust swirls in the candlelight. Somewhere above, the convent eats in silence. Down here, the beer matures, quiet, still, and full of purpose. Lunch has come and gone, and the convent hums with the kind of subdued energy that settles in after a simple but satisfying meal. Lentil stew, coarse brown bread, and yes, another small mug of ale. This time slightly cooler, darker, and more fragrant. You're starting to see the pattern. A different brew for different times of day. A practical calendar, marked in froth and bubbles. Outside, the sun is at its height, and a few sisters tend to the garden. Not just vegetables, though you see plenty of those, but a meticulous patch of herbs. This is where the magic begins. Yarrow, rosemary, sage, even some bright yellow calendula. You kneel beside Sister Ermina, who's snipping mugwort with practiced fingers. "This one," she says softly, "keeps the bad dreams away. Or at least keeps the beer interesting." She smiles, tucks a strand of hair back under her veil, and returns to her work. You follow her back to the brew room, where the next batch is already underway. Brewing isn't a one-pot event. It's a sequence, a cycle, and the nuns stagger batches with military precision. While one ferments in a cool cellar, another cools in wooden vats above. Another is already being poured into jugs for delivery. The sisters are always moving, their tasks interlocking like a monastery-sized clockwork. You stop trying to keep track. By mid-afternoon, deliveries begin. A few lucky villagers are allowed inside the gates, but most line up at the back wall where a small wooden hatch opens. just wide enough for a jug to pass through. Sister Ida, a tall woman with surprisingly muscular arms, lifts barrels with ease and exchanges a few quiet words with customers. Some pay in coin. Others bring goods, linen, firewood, even dried fish. Barter is common. One old woman hands over a jar of pickled garlic and walks away with a jug nearly as tall as her grandson. The beer economy is alive and well. Here's something you didn't expect: competition. Not with taverns. Those were often supplied by monastic brewers anyway, but with the monks down the road. Yes, the brothers brew too, but the nuns? They're getting better reviews. There are whispers, tales of noblemen preferring the convent's herb-finished red ale to the monks' over-spiced swill. One story, likely apocryphal, claims the Bishop of Mainz personally requested the nuns' Christmas ale for a feast. The monks were less than thrilled. Historians still argue whether this rivalry was friendly, ecclesiastical, or borderline commercial. Surviving records hint at price undercutting, secret taste testings, and even one petty incident where the monks accidentally redirected a grain shipment meant for the convent. Oops, but the sisters hold their own. In fact, their brews begin appearing at seasonal fairs, sold in discreet stalls under the banners of affiliated patrons. The nuns couldn't stand and sell directly, but no one said anything about friends of the convent. Clever. You wander over to a small chamber just off the main hall where Sister Valpurga is writing. Not prayers, not scripture, recipes. Detailed, complex, and delightfully annotated. Notes like, "This one foamed too much." Perhaps the rosemary was feeling dramatic. You lean over her shoulder and see a date, 1183. She's cataloging nearly a decade's worth of brewing experiments. This is serious work, and she treats it with the same reverence as a scribe illuminating a gospel. Each batch is given a name, some Latin, some local dialect, and tracked through its entire brewing cycle. Strength, taste, storage notes, even the mood on the brew day. Rainy. Sister Cunigund particularly grumpy. But even with all this care, the final product always has a bit of mystery. Some batches turn sour. Others blossom into something magical. It's a gamble, and yet, somehow, the nuns seem to win more often than not. You remember that cracked spoon Sister Cunigund won't let anyone touch? It's back in rotation, used only for stirring the wort right before fermentation. Is it superstition? Possibly. But considering that the last batch stirred with a new spoon exploded in the cellar, yes, literally, nobody questions it anymore. Fringe detail for you. Some nuns believe the beer's spirit could be disrupted by bad moods. There are references to silent brewing days when only the most serene sisters were allowed in the brewroom. You think about this as you watch a novice trip over a bucket and spill soaked barley across the floor. She looks up, mortified. Sister Cunigund raises an eyebrow and simply says, "Tomorrow, maybe embroidery." Late afternoon fades into that soft golden light that makes everything look more romantic than it actually is. You sit on a low stone wall, nursing the last of the day's weaker brew. It's crisp, slightly nutty, with a back note of something floral. Maybe time, maybe magic. And you realize these women aren't just brewing ale. They're preserving knowledge, transmitting it, refining it. Their brewing wasn't static, it evolved. Over the years, recipes changed, techniques improved, tools upgraded. A mash tun that started as a wooden barrel might now be lined with tin. Clay jugs gave way to stronger ceramic ones. They adapted, and the beer got better. This is how they outsold the monks, not with flashy marketing or brutish volume, but with quiet consistency, with care, with precision, with centuries of slowly perfected wisdom poured into every mug. As the sky shifts toward twilight, the sisters gather in the courtyard again, this time not for labor, but for brief leisure. Some in garments, some shell peas. One plays a quiet tune on a wooden flute. The brewing yard is empty now, save for a few stacked barrels glowing in the last rays of the sun. You lean against a tree and exhale the scent of yeast and lavender still on your clothes. You might not be a nun. You might not even know your barley from your buckwheat. But something tells you, if you live here long enough, you'd get it. You'd learn the rhythm, the songs, the stare Sister Cunigund gives when someone forgets to stir clockwise. And maybe, just maybe, you get your own cracked wooden spoon someday. You wake the next morning to the low, hollow ring of matins, the earliest bell still long before sunrise. Your bones protest, but there's something about the cool stone underfoot and the quiet rustle of veils in the dark that makes this moment oddly calming. You're not quite part of the routine yet, but you're orbiting it, like an outsider slowly absorbing the rhythm. After prayers, there's a quick meal, leftover bread, a smear of honey, and, of course, a cup of something warm and bitter. Morning ale, they call it. Weaker, lighter, brewed specifically to be consumed at sunrise without putting anyone back to bed. Think of it like medieval breakfast tea, if tea also made your cheeks a little rosy by lauds. But today's not about brewing or sipping. It's distribution day, and you're about to go on a delivery run. Sister Ida beckons you with a small nod and hands you a long staff, part walking stick, part self-defense tool, part get-out-of-the-way signal. You follow her and a novice nun named Beatrix as they load 2 stout ponies with canvas sacks of sealed ceramic jugs. Each jug bears the convent's symbol, a stylized sheaf of barley tied with a ribbon, and each is marked with initials or a family sigil etched in charcoal. Today's stops? A manor house, a small pilgrim's inn, and the Reeves office at the village edge. A full itinerary for a nun's version of a beer truck. The road winds through the mist, hoofbeats muffled in the dirt, and for a while, no one speaks. Just birds, breeze, and the occasional splash as the ponies wade through a shallow stream. You can smell the jugs even from here, a comforting scent of yeast, spice, and damp clay. The first stop is the manor, perched on a hill that clearly thought too highly of itself. A steward greets the nuns with a kind of impatient reverence, respectful of the veil, annoyed at the delay. Sister Ida ignores the attitude and quietly checks off items on her parchment. The steward offers a small sack of coin and a politely insincere, "May God reward your labors." Back on the path, Beatrix rolls her eyes so subtly it's almost imperceptible. You grin. The second delivery is warmer. A tiny inn with crooked walls and a roof that looks like it's being held up by stubbornness alone. The innkeeper is a round woman with flour on her hands and a laugh that sounds like thunder wrapped in honey. "Ah, the sister's gold," she declares, uncorking a jug and sniffing the contents. "This'll keep the pilgrims smiling through blisters and bedbugs." She trades a basket of eggs, 3 bundles of dried thyme, and a tiny vial of lavender oil. Beatrix carefully counts the items and scribbles notes with a borrowed goose feather. Barter complete. Over a simple lunch beneath an oak, you get your first real lecture from Sister Ida. She speaks slowly, like someone who rarely wastes breath. "We sell because we must. The abbess says God does not provide coins directly from the sky." You nod, unsure whether that was rhetorical. She continues. "The monks sell too, but their beer, too heavy, too proud. Ours is food. Ours is prayer. You taste it, and you think someone cared. It's not arrogance. It's pride of craft. And there's a difference. The final stop is the Reeves office, a squat stone building with a cold interior and a large ledger chained to the table. The Reeve is away, but his assistant accepts the delivery. She wears trousers, which surprises you. Later, Sister Ida mentions she's a widow who took over her husband's duties. She knows a good cask when she tastes one. Back at the convent by late afternoon, the ponies unburdened and grazing happily, the nuns unpack a few return jugs for cleaning. One has a faint crack. Another has mold around the cork. Both are sorted into a separate pile, damaged but not useless. Because here's the twist. Even the rejects are valuable. Sister Valperga runs a small side room workshop where damaged jugs are repurposed. Cracks are sealed with wax and turned into storage pots. Handles are filed off and reglazed into candle holders. Even beer dregs are saved, used in bread, in vinegar making, in cleaning stubborn stains. Nothing wasted, not even foam. You help clean a jug and are handed a peculiar tool, a kind of long, twisted brush made from horsehair and a bent willow branch. It smells like old soap and rosemary. Fringe detail. Some convents had specific sisters known as vessel guardians, whose entire job was to maintain, inspect, and bless the containers used in brewing. It wasn't superstition, it was logistics. Contaminated vessels could ruin a whole batch. Historians still argue whether these women were treated as sacred technicians or just glorified cleaners. The truth probably lies somewhere between reverence and rag duty. As dusk creeps in, you find yourself back in the brewroom. The vats are silent now, still warm but resting. A fresh batch has begun fermenting in the cellar, its soft bubbling a sleepy rhythm you can feel in your feet if you stand still long enough. You sip a mug of the newest batch, nutty, spiced, gently cloudy, and realize it tastes different here than it did out in the world. Something about the quiet, the rhythm, the fact that you watched it go from grain to goblet. It's not just beer, it's biography. Later that night, you help stoke the small hearth beneath the mash tun. The embers glow a soft orange, and the scent of soaked barley still clings to the air like incense. You're beginning to understand. In the lives of these women, brewing isn't separate from devotion. It is devotion. The same hands that turn pages in a prayer book also stir wort with practiced grace. The same lips that whisper psalms also blow gently across the top of a mug to cool it before tasting. And here, in the gentle flicker of firelight and yeast-laced air, the divine doesn't come down in flashes of glory. It rises slowly, steadily, in little bubbles, fizzing to the surface, then disappearing into peace. Midweek, and the rhythm of the convent has grown so familiar that you can almost predict the next bell before it rings. You're no nun, but you've stopped jumping at the clangs, and your body responds to the day's pace with a certain sleepy ease. Which is good, because today you're going deep, down into the fermenting cellars where the real alchemy happens. You follow Sister Matilda down a narrow, cool stairwell lit only by high slits in the stone wall and the occasional beeswax candle. The air grows damp, earthy, and somehow comforting, like an old loaf of bread that's lived a very interesting life. The cellar is long, low, and lined with barrels of varying sizes, some newer, some so aged their hoops are fused to the wood with years of sticky history. Sister Matilda runs her hand lovingly along one as if greeting an old friend. "This one's Agnes," she says. "Leaked for 6 winters, then got over it." You're not sure if that's a joke, but you smile anyway. She explains how fermentation isn't just about waiting. It's about balance, warmth, moisture, timing. Each batch behaves a little differently. Some bubble over in excitement. Others sit quietly for days before waking up. There's even one batch that's currently fermenting in near silence, and the sisters are watching it with the kind of wary reverence you'd reserve for a sleeping dragon. You lean in close and hear it, a faint, inconsistent gurgle. Not the robust fizz of the morning ale you help mash. This one's more hesitant, like it's unsure about becoming beer at all. Maybe it needs a hymn, Matilda says deadpan, and she sings one. Just one line of a Gregorian chant, her voice echoing softly through the barrels. You're not sure if it's helping the yeast, but it's definitely helping your soul. Here's a fun oddity. Some nunneries believe that if you prayed over a brew for at least 9 consecutive nights, it would never go sour. Whether that's divine chemistry or psychological placebo, historians still argue. What's certain is that those records were kept, and the habit, pun intended, lasted for generations. And fermentation wasn't just for ale. While you're down here, you see crocks of sour cabbage. Yes, nuns invented their own version of kraut, pots of garlic preserved in oil, and a few ambitious jars labeled mustum. Sister Matilda explains this is grape must, an experiment to make a tart, rudimentary wine-like tonic. Not for indulgence, strictly medicinal. Mostly, the cellar has its own set of rules. A brew in progress is never disturbed by idle chatter, clanging tools, or emotional outbursts. There's even a tradition of leaving offerings near the oldest barrels. A few grains, a twist of ribbon, once even a carved wooden mouse. You get the sense it's part superstition, part coping mechanism, part medieval inside joke. At one end of the cellar, behind a low, arched doorway, you find a separate chamber, the coldest room of all. Sister Theodrata calls it the halfway house, a kind of limbo for brews that haven't decided what they want to be yet. Some go sour, some mellow out, some turn unexpectedly smoky. There's no formula, just time, and therein lies the art. Modern folks talk about fermentation as science, and it is eventually, but here, in the damp dark under layers of prayer, sweat, and barley dust, it's closer to witchcraft. The nuns adjust temperature using clever tricks, storing hot stones from the hearth, banking snow in the far corners during winter, or simply wrapping certain barrels in thick wool cloaks woven by the older sisters. One method involves singing into a barrel before sealing it. That batch is affectionately called the choir's brew. You imagine it fizzing with harmonies, probably a little smug. Every now and then, a cask goes rogue, explodes, leaks, or turns so violently sour that it's declared cursed and dumped in the herb field with a half-hearted apology to St. Arnold, the patron of brewers. Yes, there's a patron saint. And yes, the nuns talk to him. Often, especially when a batch starts hissing. You asked how often that happens. Only when someone forgets to stir clockwise, says Sister Theodrata with a smile that might not be a joke. There's a shelf in one corner filled with old wooden spoons, each labeled with initials. Retired tools of the trade. Some cracked, some darkened with use, one carved with an intricate vine pattern. You're told that a sister receives a personalized spoon after her 10th successful batch. Theirs is a faith not only of scripture, but of starch, hops, and stubborn fermentation logs. You rest against a barrel and let your eyes close for a moment, the earthy smell wrapping around you like a blanket. It's a particular scent, something between sourdough, forest moss, and the back of a warm horse. Oddly soothing. You could stay here for hours. But Sister Matilda taps your shoulder. Time to rack, not sleep. Beer racking, which means siphoning the finished brew from barrel to smaller storage jugs, leaving behind the sediment. It's delicate work. Too fast, and you stir up the lees. Too slow, and the ale oxidizes. You assist as best you can, though your first attempt results in a foamy mess and a stern look from Sister Cunigund, who has appeared once again, possibly summoned by the sound of inefficiency. You try again, slower this time, steady, and yes, it works. Clear amber liquid flows into the jug like molten sunlight, and you feel a flicker of pride. It's not holy scripture, but it might just be holy. And somewhere in that cold, damp cellar, surrounded by humming barrels, sacred recipes, and the faint sound of someone chanting upstairs, you realize this is less about beer and more about belief. The belief that something as simple as grain and water can transform into nourishment. The belief that discipline, daily, quiet, imperfect, can create something worth sharing. And that maybe you too can leave behind something bubbling and alive. You wake sore in the arms and a little bleary from last night's cellar work. But there's no sleeping in when the chickens start their absurdly self-important squawking. A novice, probably Beatrix, slips a crust of honeyed oatcake into your hand and whispers, "Harvest day. Today, you're headed out to the barley fields." Yes, the beer needs barley. But barley doesn't just appear in sacks by divine delivery. It needs to be planted, coaxed, defended from birds with noisy bells and old cloth tied to sticks, then finally, patiently harvested. And nuns? Nuns do it all. The field is just outside the cloister walls. past the vegetable garden and a patch of medicinal herbs. Rows of pale gold sway in the breeze, waiting for your clumsy hands. A dozen sisters are already at work, curved like parentheses over the grain, sickles flashing gently in the light. It's a meditative choreography. Slice, gather, bind, repeat. You join them, and the first thing you learn is that barley fights back. The stalks are scratchy, the head's prickly, and the dust gets in your eyes, your nose, your soul. It smells like sweat and sun and something older than any book in the scriptorium. Sister Agnes sees you're struggling and offers a wry smile. First harvest always itches. That means it's working. Still, there's a satisfaction to the rhythm. Your arms ache, your back protests, but your mind drifts somewhere between focus and daydream. The birds keep gossiping overhead. Someone's humming a drinking song that's probably not approved by the abbess. You feel yourself relaxing into the motion, and then you spot the scarecrow. It's ancient, more moss than wood, and someone's draped it in a discarded veil, possibly from a sister with a sense of humor. Its arms are outstretched, as if waiting for a long-delayed hug. You try not to laugh out loud, but it gets better. There's a small wooden placard nailed to its chest. St. Hopulus, defender of the brew. Apparently, this is a tradition. A sort of unofficial patron scarecrow who watches over the barley and occasionally receives small offerings. Bits of bread, snippets of ribbon, even a poem carved in a bark once. The nuns don't worship it, of course, not formally. But you notice they all greet it one way or another. A nod, a pat on the arm, a whispered joke. Historians still argue whether medieval nuns held on to these semi-pagan field traditions out of habit, reverence, or just plain practicality. You suspect it's a mix of all three, because when you rely on weather, worms, and wayward birds for your harvest, you want all the help you can get, even if it's made of straw. After the cutting comes the gathering. Barley is bound into tight sheaves and stacked into little huts called shocks to dry. You help carry bundles on your shoulder and are immediately ambushed by a family of extremely judgmental field mice. Sister Hildegard, stoic and sinewy, simply shrugs and says they lived here first. By noon, you're drenched in sweat and unsure whether your hair is full of barley or actual insects. Maybe both. The sisters pass around small clay cups of what they call field beer, barely fermented, a little fizzy, definitely warm. It tastes of sour apple, with smoke, and something faintly herbal. Not refreshing, but oddly comforting, like drinking a hug from a very old aunt. Lunch is eaten right there on the edge of the field. Stewed lentils, coarse bread, and dried plums so chewy they could double as weaponry. A few sisters nap under a tree. Sister Ida sketches something in a notebook. You finally ask her what. Crop logs, she says as if it's obvious. Sun hours, weed density, grain height. Our brewing starts here, and you realize the beer isn't made in the brewery. Not really. It's born here, under the sun, in the dirt, amid bugs and backaches and bundles of barley. Everything else is just transformation. In the afternoon, your task shifts to sorting and pre-malting. The most perfect grains are selected for steeping. Others are saved for flour or feed. There's a strange joy in handling them, like shuffling warm sand through your fingers. And every sister seems to have a secret test. One bites the grain. Another tosses it in water and watches how it spins. Beatrix just sniffs them. Bad grain smells like wet boots, she declares. Later, you help fill soaking bins, wooden troughs lined with woven baskets. This is the first step of malting, where grain begins to germinate. Over the next few days, it'll be turned regularly by hand. But for now, it sits, softening, changing. One bin, marked with a small red ribbon, is off limits. Sister Matilda notices your curiosity and leans in conspiratorially. That one's for winter ale, she says. Special recipe. Spiced. Ferments for weeks. You glance at the bin as you pass. It smells faintly of cinnamon and mystery. Before dusk, you're sent to the drying barn, a low, warm building filled with racks and smoke. This is where the sprouted grain will be roasted once it's ready. Some will be gently dried for pale ale. Others charred almost black for the thick, smoky brew they serve on feast days. The heat is low but constant, and the air tastes like biscuits and bonfires. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. In some regions, the malt drying process involved layers of fresh herbs. Sage, rosemary, even crushed juniper. Not just for flavor, but to keep insects at bay and, supposedly, to encourage visions. Whether anyone actually hallucinated from a rosemary malted beer remains uncertain. But Sister Valpurga swears she once dreamed a talking rabbit gave her a recipe. She may have been fasting. The sun dips low, and the shadows of sheaves stretch long across the fields. You walk back to the cloister slowly, arms aching, boots dusty, hair full of barley burrs and field gossip. You smell like grain, sweat, and humble satisfaction. Dinner is quiet tonight. Everyone's too tired to chatter, but someone plays a slow tune on a flute near the kitchen. It floats through the hall like a lullaby. You sip your mug slowly. Tonight's brew is mellow, nutty, full of the fields you just helped reap. You made this in a small way. Every scratch on your arm, every bundle you carried, it's in here. And as you settle into your straw pallet, your muscles humming with fatigue and pride, you finally understand why the nuns don't just pray for good beer. They work for it, and they work together. The morning starts with a quiet rustle of robes and the smell of smoke, just a whisper of it curling through the corridor like a gentle warning. No panic, not yet, but enough to send Sister Valpurga hurrying past your chamber with her sleeves rolled up, a bucket in each hand, muttering something about the kiln acting up again. You groggily pull on your cloak and follow the sound of clanging pots and low, deliberate prayers to the drying barn. It's not on fire, thank the saints, but the malt is hotter than it should be. Someone, possibly Sister Claire, who's a little optimistic with firewood, stoked the furnace too eagerly. Now the whole batch smells a bit, well, more toasted than planned. Too much heat during kilning, and you risk scorching the grain. It alters the flavor, kills off enzymes, and can leave the beer tasting like a burnt shoe. A holy shoe, but still. But if you just undercorrect it, the darker roast could produce a pleasantly bold winter ale. It's a delicate dance, really, an unspoken conversation between smoke, time, and barley. You and two novices help spread the steaming malt onto wide screens, airing it out, praying the burnt edge turns into something poetic instead of tragic. Sister Valpurga gives it a sniff, shrugs, and mutters, St. Bridget liked a strong brew. Ah yes, St. Bridget, the unofficial mascot of nun brewers everywhere. Irish, fierce, and fond of ale, she's said to have turned bathwater into beer for thirsty lepers. Whether she actually did or not, historians still argue. But her name's invoked every time the batch misbehaves, which is often. By midday, the malt cools, and the verdict is drinkable, possibly even delicious. Sister Claire offers you a guilty plum from her apron pocket by way of apology. After lunch, you follow the roasted malt as it's crushed, gently, by hand, with stone rollers that have likely been used since before the current abbess took her vows. The room smells heavenly. Roasted grain, dust, a bit of honey. Like granola made by saints. But brewing isn't just barley. It needs flavor. It needs preservation. It needs hops, or depending on the convent, something else entirely. Because before hops became standard in European brewing, beer was seasoned with an herbal blend called grut, a mysterious, ever-changing mix of local plants. And nuns? They had opinions about grut. Sister Theodrata leads you into the apothecary garden, a riot of organized chaos. Sage, rosemary, yarrow, sweet gale, mugwort, wild thyme. It's like walking through a sleepy forest guided by a botanical librarian. She picks a sprig of bog myrtle and says, "This one keeps the beer from turning. Also scares off evil spirits." Probably. You learn that grit isn't just for taste, it's a form of local identity. One abbey might favor rosemary and lavender. Another might insist on wormwood and chamomile. Recipes were guarded like relics, written in code, passed down with care, and sometimes hidden in psalters between verses of Deus meus adiuva me. Some convents embraced hops early, prized for their long shelf life and bitter snap. Others viewed hops with suspicion. They were too masculine, or too Germanic, or, in one memorable record, tasted like boiled fence. Strong words, but here they use both. A pinch of hops, a touch of grit. The result? Balanced bitterness, floral hints, and a taste you could never quite replicate. Here's your quirky tidbit. One 13th century nunnery recorded adding a bit of ground oyster shell to their grit blend. Not for flavor, but for strength of bone. Whether it worked or not, no one's tested recently. You declined Sister Theodrata's offer to revive the old recipe. You help harvest the herbs, snipping carefully, placing each in its own cloth pouch labeled with neat Latin script. Artemisia, salvia, melissa. It feels like making a medieval tea sampler for witches with excellent table manners. Back in the brewery, the crushed malt is added to warm water in a great wooden tun, creating the mash. You help stir it, slow, steady, with a paddle as long as your arm. The room steams. The air thickens. It smells like baking bread and damp earth. This is where the magic begins. The starch is breaking down into sugar, ready to become alcohol. You remember the rules. Clockwise only. Never let the paddle rest too long. And if you hear a sound like humming bees, that's probably the yeast getting excited. You chuckle, but Sister Cunigund doesn't. As the mash steeps, the nuns add their chosen herbs. Pinches of green and gold drifting through the liquid like sleepy leaves on a summer pond. Then the wort is drawn off and boiled again, a rolling, murmuring cauldron of future comfort. Smells like next Tuesday, someone mutters. There's a tension in the room. Not fear, just reverence. The way bakers hold their breath when bread begins to rise. The way singers pause before a final note. Brewing isn't chemistry here. It's intimacy, ritual, a sacrament in steam. And then they taste it. A sip, another, silence. Finally, Sister Matilda says, balanced, soft, with a hint of basil and recklessness. You grin. That's a compliment, apparently. As the wort cools, you help ladle it into fermentation barrels. Each cask gets a handwritten tag, and the nuns whisper small prayers as they seal the lids. No one rushes. This is the part you can't control, the waiting. You remember what Sister Agnes said your first day. We do what we can. The yeast does the rest. Evening falls. You rinse your hands in warm rosemary water and sit near the hearth, sipping a light ale that tastes faintly of citrus and fresh bread. Your muscles ache again, but it's a good ache, a productive one. You help create something alive, and soon others will taste it. There's talk of bottling, of markets, of how the monks downriver will likely try to steal the flavor profile again and pass it off as their own. Sister Valpurga smirks. Let them try. They always overhop. Tomorrow, you'll learn about the convent's trade routes and how these modest barrels travel farther than you'd ever imagined. But tonight, you drift towards sleep with the scent of basil and barley still lingering on your sleeves, and the comforting thought that somewhere, even now, the yeast is humming. You wake to bells, not the big iron ones calling everyone at matins, but the soft brass chimes tied to the arrival card outside the gates. It's delivery day, which means you're about to learn the less glamorous, but surprisingly cunning side of the nuns' beer operation, logistics. You lace up your sandals and follow Sister Bertrada to the back courtyard, where a donkey-drawn wagon is already being unloaded. Wooden crates, sacks of barley, sealed parchment orders tied with ribbon. There's even a small bag of candied fennel someone clearly snuck in by mistake. Sister Bertrada pockets it without blinking. You're expecting a simple, sleepy process of trade. Barrel for coin, ale for eggs, But what you find is something far more strategic. This convent? It's running a regional supply chain with the quiet efficiency of a monastic Amazon. For starters, there's the route itself. The beer from this abbey is prized across 3 villages and at least 1 minor bishopric. It travels by cart, mule, and occasionally boat along a shallow canal dug ages ago by, if the rumors are true, a crew of retired nuns who once specialized in drainage miracles. The barrels are sealed with wax stamped by the abbess herself, each marked with the emblem of the convent, a sheaf of barley wrapped in a scroll. It's humble, clever, and instantly recognizable to their buyers. You help Sister Bertrada load the fresh casks onto a departing cart bound for the weekly market. She tucks a small prayer slip into each one. Not for superstition, she claims, but customer retention. You chuckle, but she's not wrong. These nuns understand something modern marketers are still chasing. Loyalty is emotional. And customers love a beer that feels blessed, literally and figuratively. You tag along to the edge of the market town with 2 novices and Sister Gisela, the abbey's designated face for public exchange. Cloaked in modest robes, she navigates the stalls like a seasoned diplomat, bartering, joking, occasionally chiding the butcher for trying to short her a haunch of lamb. At the beer stand, she displays the week's flagship brew, a golden ale with notes of sage, pear, and what one taster once described as hope, but subtle. The buyers come, craftsmen, traveling monks, a pair of friars pretending not to be jealous, and the orders are steady. But here's the twist. The monks used to have this territory. That's right. A few decades back, the neighboring male monastery held the beer monopoly around here. But while their batches were bolder, they were also inconsistent. Sometimes too sour, sometimes too strong. Blessed are the meek, one village brewer quipped, for they shall at least be drinkable. The nuns saw their chance. Quietly at first. 1 cask here, a bottle there. But word spread. People preferred the smoother, gentler, more consistent beer from the convent. And when they added those little herbal blends, a touch of lavender here, a hint of woodruff there, that was it. Game over. Now some monks still compete, but the nuns outsell them. Regularly, and without fanfare. Historians still argue whether this shift in power was due to superior technique, better business sense, or the quiet charisma of Sister Gisela's deadpan bargaining face. Probably all 3. Back at the convent, the ledgers are updated. You peer over the shoulder of Sister Matilda, who handles the records, and watch her track every sale with neat inked lines and subtle flourishes. It's beautiful bookkeeping, if such a thing exists. Each batch has a name, sometimes referencing saints, sometimes seasonal symbols. This week's ale is called Quiet Bloom. Last week's was Pilgrim's Thirst. There was once one called Spilled Ink, though no one will tell you why. You discover the nuns aren't just making beer, they're branding it. And not in a cynical, corporate way. It's sincere, a reflection of what's been brewed, who helped, what the herbs were whispering that week. Here's your quirky tidbit. One summer, a batch of beer turned unexpectedly sour. Rather than dump it, the nuns bottled it as penitence. It became wildly popular. People lined up to drink their mistakes. And here's where the real savvy kicks in. The convent reinvests most of the profit into village charities, orphan care, and hospital funding. But a small sliver goes into what they call innovation, code for experiments. You're shown one such project, a beehive nestled against the old stone wall, shaded by fig trees. The honey from these bees is being tested as a sugar source in a new seasonal ale. Believe, one novice suggests as a name. She's ignored, but not unkindly. You help bottle some of last month's batch. The process is rhythmic and oddly soothing, like sealing tiny pieces of calm into amberglass time capsules. You cork each one by hand, then dip them in a hot wax to create that telltale seal. The wax smells faintly of cloves. Sister Valpurga hands you a label to affix. It's handwritten, looped letters curling like vines. soft ember, brewed with holy silence. You stare at a moment. There's something oddly profound about how these women turn yeast and water into something that speaks, however quietly. And the convent's reach isn't just local. Travelers spread word. Pilgrims stop by for a flask to take on the road. There's even talk that a bishop from the capital prefers the nuns' beer at official dinners. He writes in code, herbal syrup or monastic tonic, but everyone knows what he means. That night, you help Sister Agnes box up 2 barrels for a distant abbey. She adds extra padding made of old cloth strips and tucks in a dried lavender sachet to keep the mood. You ask her if the monks ever send compliments. She smirks. No, but they copy our recipes. So we must be doing something right. The fire's low when you finally return to your chamber. Your arms ache again, and there's barley dust in your sleeves. You think about those barrels now, trundling through forest trails and muddy roads, carrying not just beer, but stories, prayers, and a quiet defiance that never needed a pulpit. Tomorrow, you'll learn about the Abbey's rulebook and what lines they've bent or broken to make this all possible. But for now, sleep creeps in like foam over a well-filled cup. The Abbey wakes, as it always does, with the pale gray hush of dawn and the soft rustle of habits brushing across stone. But today, you're not headed to the brewery or the garden. No, today you're being ushered, somewhat mysteriously, into the scriptory where Sister Eulalia is already unrolling parchment with the grave expression of someone about to read aloud a list of sins. Except it's not sins. Not exactly. It's the convent's brewing rulebook. At first glance, it looks like any other dusty medieval manuscript. Tight lettering, decorative initials, a few saints drawn in the margins giving each other judgmental side eyes. But this isn't scripture. It's bureaucracy in holy clothing. You sit beside her, squinting at the Latin script as she translates. Measurements, temperature ranges, fermentation schedules, even clauses about what to do if someone accidentally drops their rosary into the mash. Answer: retrieve it immediately, pray over the batch, and carry on. This rulebook is thorough, suspiciously so, and as Sister Eulalia flips to the back, she adds, "We've made some amendments." And here it comes, the quiet rebellion behind the quiet beer. The official Benedictine rule, followed by most monastic orders, says nuns shouldn't handle money, shouldn't seek profit, shouldn't meddle in worldly matters. Brewing? That's fine. Selling beer to half the countryside while running a stealthy export operation? Slightly less fine. Historians still argue whether this convent had permission from their bishop to commercialize their beer. Some records suggest they did. Others hint at a don't ask, don't excommunicate policy. One scholar even claimed a papal envoy visited, tasted the beer, and conveniently forgot to file a report. You ask Sister Eulalia how they square this with the rule. She raises an eyebrow and gestures to the margins of the parchment. Tiny notes, alternate wordings, theological justifications written in miniature, like legal footnotes from a team of scholarly elves. Interpretation, she says, is a sacred tradition, and that's the truth of it. These women aren't defying the rules. They're navigating them with the precision of people who've had to, for centuries. In fact, their entire operation is a case study in spiritual loopholes. For example, since nuns can't technically own money, all proceeds from beer sales are held in stewardship by the abbey, then used to fund acts of mercy, which, coincidentally, includes maintaining the brewery, expanding the garden, and buying better boots for winter deliveries. You leaf through a side record, a weathered ledger listing every buyer, every barrel, every coin and crumb accounted for. It's so meticulous, it makes modern accounting look like a fever dream. There's even a color-coded system for favor exchanges, like 2 jars of wild honey in exchange for songbook repair. And here's your quirky tidbit. One particularly tight year, the convent paid a cooper, barrel maker, not in coin, but in tutoring. 3 nuns taught his son to read in exchange for 10 new barrels. He later became a bishop, Sister Eulalia adds with a grin. So, good investment. You're ushered next into a smaller chamber, where two novices are translating brewing records into regional dialects. This is where the rules blur again, because not only do the nuns track and label every batch, they occasionally rename ingredients for trade. Lavender becomes purification herb. Hops, bitter blossom. Honey is sometimes sun sugar. Are these lies? Or are they poetic truths? You raise an eyebrow, and Sister Theodrata chuckles. We're not lying. We're marketing. There's a pause, then a laugh, then someone mutters, "Saint Bridget, forgive us," and they go right back to their work. You begin to see the pattern. The Abbey's brewing success isn't built just on ingredients. It's built on interpretation, on reading between the lines, on understanding that devotion doesn't mean docility. You're handed a translated copy of the beer charter, a semi-formal agreement signed by the abbess and the convent's council years ago. It outlines how the operation must never overshadow their spiritual mission, how no nun may drink to excess, 1 cup at dinner, maximum, and how all recipe innovations must be approved by a majority vote. Except the clove experiment, someone says from behind curtain. That was a unilateral decision. You're still grinning when Sister Bertrada brings you into the cellar vaults. Here's where the Abbey really blurs lines. Aging Alesh in cool, deep, stone-carved rooms. Barrels stacked like slumbering monks, each labeled not just by date, but by emotion. Wistful pale, quiet bitterness, hopeful malt. No two are alike. Some of these barrels are months old. Others have rested for years. One in the corner, half-dusted, wrapped in dried lavender, dates back over a decade. We save that one, Sister Bertrada whispers, for the next abbess election. You ask how the rules address this aging practice. She winks. They don't. There's a certain serenity to the whole thing, this quiet resistance through record-keeping, loopholes, and careful prayer. These nuns didn't topple the rules. They annotated them into compliance. As evening bells ring, you help carry scrolls back to the scriptorium. Sister Eulalia lets you roll one and secure it with a silk tie. The parchment crinkles softly. You're sealing centuries of quiet audacity, inked in both obedience and wit. You pass a novice reciting brewery ratios aloud as penance for mislabeling a barrel. Half malt to 2/3 water, she mutters. Or was it 2/3 malt? She sighs, starts again. In your chamber that night, the wind whistles faintly through the shutters. You lie there thinking not of barrels or herbs, but of how many revolutions began with something as small as a margin note. Tomorrow, you'll finally witness the sacred tasting ritual and maybe, just maybe, get to pour your own first pint. But tonight, the air smells faintly of lavender ink and loopholes. And somehow, that's enough. Morning arrives on a cool breath of fog, curling around the chapel towers and creeping through the courtyard arches. You've grown used to the rhythms now. The early bells, the clatter of wooden shoes on stone, the soft rustle of habits moving from chapel to garden to brew hall. But today's rhythm feels different. You notice it in the way the sisters speak a little softer, how they seem to carry their tasks with a reverence usually reserved for high feast days. Even Sister Gisela refrains from sarcasm before breakfast. You're being inducted, unofficially, informally, and certainly not canonically, into the most sacred ritual of the Abbey's brewing tradition, the communal tasting. You follow the sisters down the rear staircase into the aging vault. The air is cool and faintly spiced, like damp straw mixed with thyme. The barrels sit like monks in meditation, waiting for judgment. The tasting is not done lightly. It's part quality control, part spiritual reflection, and, let's be honest, part group therapy. Sister Bertrada calls it liquid lectio divina. The process begins with silence. Each sister receives a small ceramic cup, the kind that looks handmade because it is half-glazed, slightly uneven, with the Abbey symbol etched faintly on the side. No one speaks as the abbess draws the first pint. It's from a new batch, dark amber, brewed with roasted barley and hints of mugwort and fennel. The name? Veiled Light. You hold a cup. It's warm from the pour, and the scent rises gently. Earthy, herbal, almost medicinal, but in a soothing way. The kind of smell that might make you say, I don't know what this is, but I trust it. You sip, and the entire room seems to exhale with you. It's smooth, slightly bitter, with an aftertaste like toasted sage and burnt figure. One sister hums softly. Another whispers, more mellow than autumn candle, but less daring than hearthbound. You are, for the first time in your life, part of a medieval focus group. Sister Theodrata, self-appointed tasting scribe, records each comment in a long ledger with poetic seriousness. Phrases like mouthfeel of pilgrimage and melancholy mid-notes make it into the margins. Your quirky tidbit: one batch several years ago, a plum-forward brew named Storm's Lull, received such mixed reviews that the nuns held a full-day debate to rename it. They settled on Unexpected Lent. It sold out. You ask who ultimately decides which beers pass the test. The abbess shrugs. Consensus mostly, or divine inspiration, or Sister Agnes threatening to withhold cake until we agree. The next round is poured, a golden ale brewed with honey and woodruff. Light, delicate, with a floral nose. The novices go wide-eyed. One murmurs, tastes like sun on stone. Even Sister Eulalia smiles. This one, she says, is hope in a cup. It's not all poetic, though. Some test brews get brutally honest notes. Too cloudy. Tastes like damp sandals, not worth a saint's sneeze. There's one infamous failure known simply as the mistake. No one will tell you what was in it. Historians still argue whether these rituals were common in other nunneries, or if this abbey's tasting sessions were uniquely elaborate. Some records suggest similar ceremonies existed in German or Flemish convents, but few had the same depth of sensory theology. One fascinating theory claims that this tasting ritual doubled as emotional catharsis, a safe space for nuns to express joy, sorrow, doubt, even frustration through metaphor. Can't confess you're homesick? Say the beer has a longing finish. Need to criticize a decision? Suggest the brew lacks direction. Sister Gisela leans over. Beer doesn't lie, she says, but it does listen. As the tasting continues, someone reads aloud a psalm. Another sings a verse under her breath. The entire event begins to feel like a liturgy of the senses: smell, taste, memory, metaphor, all woven together. By the final pour, a spiced wheat ale nicknamed Cloud Path, you are warm, sleepy, and oddly reflective. This, you realize, isn't just about beer. It's about presence, about paying attention, about honoring the mundane as holy. You ask if this batch will be bottled. Sister Bertrada nods. We'll call it Sanctuary Sip. She pauses, unless someone suggests something worse. Later, while the Abbey resumes its daily rhythm, you help Sister Matilda prep bottles for the official launch. Each one is labeled by hand, wrapped in twine, and stamped with wax. The finishing touch, a slip of parchment with the psalm verse quoted during tasting. One sister jokes that this is how they convert the pagans. Give them a drink and a prayer, she laughs. Works every time. That night, over a modest supper of root stew and barley bread, the beer flows freely, but not excessively. 1 cup each, no more. That's the rule. And yet, the atmosphere feels celebratory, even luminous. Sister Eulalia lifts her mug. To the quiet ferment, she says. You toast with her, and in that moment, surrounded by robed women who've turned yeast and water into poetry, you feel oddly complete. Tomorrow, they'll teach you about their legends, the patron saints, the brewery ghosts, and the nun who once invented a yeast starter in a thunderstorm. But tonight, you rest easy, full of warmth and woodruff, already dreaming of Cloud Path and Unexpected Lent. The next morning brings a change of pace and atmosphere. After days of earthy labor and hushed ritual, you're finally invited into the Abbey's inner chapel for something far less solemn. but arguably just as sacred stories. Or, as Sister Gisela calls them with a wink, fermented folklore. You sit cross-legged on the stone floor as the sisters gather like a medieval book club. No scrolls this time, just steaming mugs of herbal tea, a crackling brazier for warmth, and the eager anticipation of gossip. Very old gossip. Tonight's topic, the patron saints and mythical figures of brewing. And wouldn't you know it, the nuns have their own versions, some canon, some not quite. It begins with Saint Bridget of Kildare, the Irish abbess who allegedly turned bathwater into beer and brewed enough ale to supply dozens of churches. A miracle of fermentation. Sister Theodrata murmurs, as if reciting from scripture. And she ran a double monastery. Vestan. You learn that Bridget is to brewing what Da Vinci is to invention. A mix of fact and glorious exaggeration. Some accounts say she once kept a leper colony supplied with beer for Lent. Others claim she could multiply barley like loaves and fishes. Historians still argue whether any of it is literally true. But honestly, who's counting? And then comes the fringe stuff. The Abbey, it turns out, has its own brewing ghost. They call her Sister Marybelle de Swift. Supposedly a nun in the 1200s, she died mid-brew during a thunderstorm while trying to stir the wort faster than the lightning could strike. Ever since, if a brew batch is ready exactly 3 minutes before expected, it's said she gave it a push. You'll know it's her, Sister Agnes adds gravely, if you smell cinnamon and wet wool at the same time. You do not currently smell either, but you take note. Another tale involves a mysterious wild yeast strain that once floated in from the mountains and gave one batch of ale the peculiar aroma of baked pears. The yeast was dubbed Saint Happenstance, and the sisters spent 2 years trying and failing to recreate it. That particular flavor now exists only in legend and in one surviving bottle that no one dares open. There's also talk of a monk saboteur, a rogue Benedictine from a rival monastery who tried to steal the abbey's yeast culture by hiding it in his boot. He was caught when the nuns followed the trail of exploded dough. Sister Gisela delivers this one like it's a bedtime story for petty theologians. Even the abbey's prayer book contains little brewing invocations slipped between psalms. You read one aloud. Lord, grant the mash be clean, the boil be pure, and the foam rise with righteous heart. There's a reverent pause, and then Sister Bertrada snorts. We wrote that after Sister Agnes overflowed the copper again. There's something deeply comforting in these tales. Some are half-truths wrapped in prayer, others full fictions offered in good faith. And yet, every single one reflects a real thread in the Abbey's long and bubbling history. You learn that every brewing nun gets a nickname once she's earned her apron. The Yeast Whisperer, Sister Hoppy, Barley Ann. You ask if you get one too. They say you have to survive 3 boil burns and a bottling backlog first. Fair. Perhaps the most curious legend of all, a supposed prophecy hidden in the stained glass windows of the Abbey's north wing. Some say it shows a nun handing a pint to a crowned figure, possibly Charlemagne, possibly a confused abbot, while behind her, a field of barley turns to gold. According to Sister Eulalia, one art historian insisted it symbolized the sanctity of manual labor. Another claimed it predicted a future golden ale that would bring glory to the convent. You, sipping your tea and eyeing the barley-colored light streaming through the window, prefer the third explanation. It's just a nun giving beer to someone who needed it. That evening, the sisters take turns reciting poetry inspired by brew days past. One is about a broken mash paddle, another a lament for spilt malt. The last is a love letter to a particularly stubborn strain of hops that refused to bloom but finally did. Just in time for Easter, you sit quietly, absorbing it all. The laughter, the warmth, the odd seriousness with which everyone treats even the silliest lore. Your quirky tidbit for the day, Sister Matilda, swears there's a hidden recipe buried beneath the altar, only to be brewed once the stars align over the abbey 3 nights in a row. It happened in 1347, she says. We think. The records in riddle form. Tomorrow, you'll join them for your first full brew from start to finish. But tonight, you fall asleep with tales of ghost nuns, divine yeast, and patron saints lingering like vapor over a warm fermenting vat. And somewhere in your dreams, you think you smell cinnamon and maybe, just maybe, wet wool. You rise to the sound of 2 bells, a little earlier than usual. And this time, instead of heading to the herb garden or the cellar, you're following the sisters straight into the brewery proper. Not just to observe or to stir here and there, but to brew. Fully, completely, from grain to boil, with only the occasional intervention of a knowing elbow nudge or bemused correction. It's your test day, though no one calls it that. The nuns say it's simply your turn to listen to the grain. You start by hauling sacks of malted barley from a storage chamber. It's heavier than it looks and dustier than you expect. Sister Gisela comments drily. No one ever sees this part on the monastery tour. As you begin to mill the grain, the room fills with the scent of warm bread crusts and dried fields. The sound is steady, crunch, grind, hum. There's something ancient in it, something that makes you feel like a cog in a very old, very gentle clock. You've chosen a classic recipe, a medium-bodied brown ale with sage, yarrow, and a whisper of honey. Nothing fancy, nothing foolish. Sister Bertrada calls it humble but hopeful. The mashing begins, barley and water, heated to just the right temperature. Not too hot, not too fast. Like a good conversation or a confession. You stir with a long wooden mash paddle, carved generations ago and smoothed by thousands of hands. Don't fight the grain, Sister Eulalia says over your shoulder. Let it tell you when it's ready. You nod solemnly, though the grain remains mum. Then comes the loudering, the slow draining of the sweet, golden wort. You watch it trickle out of the mash tun into the copper kettle, and for a moment, it feels like alchemy, from dry dust and water to liquid light. Time for the boil. You feed the fire with care, coaxing it upward without rushing. As the first bubbles begin to rise, so does your confidence. The herbs go in, sage first, then yarrow, and finally the honey. It's a sticky, fragrant offering. Sister Matilda chants softly, a brewing psalm of her own invention. And then the hops. Not too many. This isn't a punch-you-in-the-face IPA. Just enough for a hint of green sharpness, like a raised eyebrow in an otherwise gentle conversation. While the wort boils, the sisters tell you about mistakes they've made. One batch forgotten for too long became vinegar, now used to clean the floors. Another had too much honey and exploded 3 bottles in the chapel sacristy. They called it the Pentecost incident. Historians still argue whether divine intervention was involved. Your quirky tidbit today: in one lost recipe book from the 14th century, a convent brewer added powdered oyster shells to lighten the beer's body, supposedly learned from a passing sailor. The practice didn't last, but the tale did. After the boil, you cool the wort. Carefully, quickly. Time is of the essence here. Yeast doesn't like it too hot or too cold. Sister Agnes compares it to inviting someone into a bath that's just warm enough to gossip in. Then the moment comes, pitching the yeast. You hold the jar as if it's sacred relic. In a way, it is. This strain has been nurtured by the Abbey for decades, maybe centuries. It's the invisible heartbeat of their brewing. You pour, stir gently, and whisper the Abbey's unofficial yeast blessing. Rise well. Work kind. Don't explode. Fermentation begins. But your job isn't over. The brew must be moved, monitored, tasted, cared for over days. The sisters call this the beer vigil, keeping watch like ancient monks over a relic too delicate to be left alone. You help label the fermentation barrel with a handcar sign. Sister Bertrada raises an eyebrow when you suggest the name Sleepy Prophet. She nods. I've heard worse. Historians still debate how involved nuns truly were in every technical aspect of brewing, whether they controlled every stage or handed off key parts to male assistants. But this abbey leaves little doubt. Here, the process is matriarchal and meticulous. It's theology and craft in equal parts. As the sun sets, your muscles ache in places you didn't know beer could reach. But you feel content, almost euphoric. The sisters gather around your brew, now sealed in its oak cask and resting like a babe in a cradle. Sister Gisela claps you on the back. Not bad for a firstborn. You all toast with warm bread and elderflower cordial. No actual beer tonight. It's tradition to wait until the first official tasting. Anticipation, after all, is part of the recipe. Before bed, you visit the cask one more time. The surface bubbles gently under its lid. Alive, becoming. You whisper a final goodnight. Tomorrow, you'll learn how the sisters spread their beer far beyond the abbey walls, without losing what made it sacred. But tonight, you rest in the company of fermentation and faith. And maybe, just maybe, you dream of being stirred gently, slowly, in warm water scented with sage. The sun's barely risen when you're shaken gently awake, not by a bell, but by Sister Gisela herself, holding 2 steaming mugs and a conspiratorial grin. It's market day, she whispers, and we've got beer to move. You throw on your cloak and follow her into the cool dawn air. This isn't the Abbey's usual slow, sacred rhythm. Today has purpose, momentum. Wagons are being loaded, crates wrapped in cloth. Even a usually meditative Sister Agnes is muttering under her breath about the proper placement of corked bottles. You're not just brewing for quiet halls, after all. The nuns brew for people, for communities, for coin, and for reputation. This abbey has done the impossible, outbrewed and outsold the monks. You climb into the back of a creaking cart, nestled between casks of last month's Rosip Saison and this year's early batch of Erd wheat beer. The road to the town is bumpy, but it's a journey the sisters have made for generations. Halfway there, Sister Eulalia begins humming a tune. It sounds like a hymn, but she's added her own lyrics, mostly about foam levels and mild hangovers. You suspect the monks never sing like this. The town square is already busy. Merchants hawk vegetables, wool, and iron nails. Chickens dart between feet. But then the nuns arrive, and the energy shifts. The abbey's beer stall is modest. Just a cloth banner, a few barrels propped on worn stands, and a handwritten list of today's offerings. But the line? Already forming. You quickly notice something. Everyone knows them. Farmers greet them by name. Children get honey cakes on the house. Even rival merchants wave with begrudging admiration. And the beer? It's selling faster than the brothers across the square, whose stall features tall banners, gold-rimmed goblets, and exactly 2 customers. "Ow," you ask Sister Gisela. She shrugs, handing over a bottle in exchange for a loaf of spice bread. Simple. We listen to what people want. Turns out, the nuns do regular market surveys. Very informal ones, of course. They walk the lanes, ask questions, bring samples, tweak recipes. Their lavender ale with the hint of mint, inspired by a baker's request for something to pair with lemon tarts. The smoky black beer, tailored for a Thatcher who missed the taste of home. Historians still argue whether women in the Middle Ages were allowed to profit directly from brewing, especially under the rule of the church. Some say nuns were strictly bound to trade only for alms or barter. Others believe exceptions were quietly made, especially when abbeys were financially self-sufficient. What's clear here? These women know the system, and they know how to move within it. Your quirky tidbit of the day: one of the abbey's best customers is the local executioner. He swears by the double-fermented grit ale for nerves. The sisters, true to form, never judge. Though Sister Agnes once accidentally served him a non-alcoholic version when he got too chatty. As the morning unfolds, you watch the sisters navigate the crowd with the ease of seasoned politicians. They offer tastings, negotiate trades, and always always asks how each person's mother is doing. You hear stories of how the Nuns beer once stopped a town brawl, how it helped save a failing harvest festival, how one batch, delivered during a harsh winter, was described in a local poem as the warmth that did not lie. There's real power in what they do, this soft, bubbling diplomacy. But not all feedback is glowing. One woman complains that last month's spelt beer was too grassy. Another insists the new label font is hard to read. Sister Matilda takes notes with the seriousness of a cathedral scribe. Grassy, eh? What kind of grass? She asks. You begin to understand. The nuns aren't just brewing. They're curating, adapting, innovating. When a monk from the rival stall stops by and passive-aggressively compliments their non-traditional methods, Sister Eulalia thanks him with a smile, so radiant it should be painted on a ceiling. Then she offers him a free bottle to expand your palate. He walks away muttering. Everyone else chuckles. By late afternoon, the barrels are nearly empty. You sip what's left of the sage honey ale and watch as the sisters begin packing up. Sister Gisela leans over. We didn't always outsell the monks, you know. But once we stopped worrying about how we were allowed to sell and started asking why people wanted our beer, everything changed. You help load the cart. It's lighter now, physically at least. But you're carrying home new knowledge, new questions. How did they pull this off in an age where women's roles were so tightly policed? How much of their success came from bending rules? And how much from quietly rewriting them? And what exactly are they planning next? Sister Agnes gives you a knowing smile as you climb into the cart beside her. Tomorrow, you'll learn about the secret book. You blink. There's a book. Oh yes, she says, but you'll need to earn the page key first. You ask what that is. She just pats your shoulder and hums her brewing hymn. Back at the Abbey, the cart rolls into the courtyard under golden light. Tired but triumphant, the sisters unload what little's left. That night, dinner is extra cheerful. Even the abbess joins in for a modest glass. You fall asleep wondering about this mysterious book and what kind of secrets nuns might commit to ink when no bishop is watching. You wake to the sound of rain, a soft, steady rhythm that taps against the abbey's leaded windows and pools in the stone gutters. It's the kind of weather that keeps most of the sisters indoors, bustling quietly between duties. But today, your only task is to learn about the book. You're told to meet Sister Eulalia in the library. You expect dim lighting, rows of dusty volumes, perhaps a few sleeping cats. You get none of that. The library is warm, lived in, smelling faintly of beeswax polish and rosemary ink. Shelves are stacked neatly, but not obsessively so. There's a ladder you're told not to climb, unless you want a hymn sung at your funeral. You take that as a solid no. Sister Eulalia hands you a set of iron keys. Only one fits, she says. Try them all. That's the point. You search behind curtain panels, under a hinged desk, even beneath a large illustrated map of the Holy Roman Empire. Eventually, you find it, a narrow, iron-banded drawer tucked into the bottom of a writing desk. The key clicks, and the drawer slides open. Inside is the book. It's small, leather-bound, and impossibly old. No title, no markings, just a wax seal in the shape of a barley stalk crossed with a quill. Congratulations, says Eulalia. You now know about the Liber Cervisiae Sororum, the Sisters' Book of Beer. You turn the first page carefully. The ink is faded, the handwriting uneven in places. But there it is, a record of brewing practices, experiments, and confessions that span centuries. The entries are part recipe log, part diary, part quiet rebellion. One page begins, March 7th, year of our Lord, 1273. Sister Imelda attempted a sea salt stout. Results, extremely briny, possibly cursed. Another includes notes on carbonation using honey and late-stage yeast additions, techniques that wouldn't become mainstream until centuries later. Your favorite entry, though, is this. During Lent, brewed bread beer with double malt. Technically not solid food. Discuss with Abbess. Sister Eulalia watches you read. We don't show this to just anyone. You're here because you've proven something, not just with brewing, but with listening. The book's contents are strangely ahead of their time. A proto-scientific approach appears alongside theological musings. Some pages are marginalia, sketches of fermentation vessels, diagrams of root cellars, and even a small doodle of a goat apparently stealing barley. That one's canonical, Eulalia says. He still lives in legend. You ask if this book was ever discovered by outsiders. Oh, plenty of attempts, she replies. One abbot sent a scholar to catalog our domestic texts. She left with a recipe for carrot soup and mild confusion. Historians still argue whether these brewing manuals written by women were truly scientific or simply detailed housekeeping records. But this book defies the idea that medieval nuns were passive, unthinking custodians. These women were curious, experimental, a little cheeky. There's a whole section titled Possibly Ill-Advised Experiments. You flip to a bookmark page. Attempted to brew with mushrooms. Results: one vision of St. Peter on a wheel of cheese. Discontinued. That's your fringe fact for the day. You also come across a page clearly written in code. Swirls and spirals with tiny notations. That's the page key I mentioned, Eulalia says. You have to make your own before you're allowed to read it. You look at her perplexed. Make what? Your own recipe, she says simply. One that says something about who you are. That's the key. You're handed a quill, a pot of walnut ink, and a page. It's a quiet afternoon. The rain continues. You write slowly, thoughtfully. You design a beer inspired by your journey here. A mild brown ale brewed with roasted oats, a hint of elderflower, and a finish of cinnamon bark. Balanced, warm, slightly floral. You call it Pilgrim's Rest. When you're done, you paste the page into the back of the book. Eulalia seals it with wax and nods. Now you can read the coded page. She hands you a thin slip of paper, an old cipher key passed down like a family heirloom. You translate the page with care. It's not a recipe. It's a story. The first nun to brew in this abbey, Sister Adelgund, wrote it late in her life. It details how she convinced the abbess to let her brew, not only for necessity, but for joy. She describes the moment beer boiled over the kettle and caught fire, her first real mistake, and how that very accident led her to develop a safer technique. The story ends with a sentence you won't forget. I did not come to brew beer. I came to make something that could outlive me. You sit in silence for a while. Later that evening, Sister Gisela pours you a small glass of your Pilgrim's Rest. The others gather around. They sip. They nod. No one says anything overly complimentary, but that's how you know it's good. The abbess lifts her glass. To legacies, she says, and to fireproof kettles. You all laugh. Tomorrow, you'll join a rite rarely performed. Something spiritual. Something sacred. But tonight, you sit with the sisters in a room full of flickering candles, cracked recipe books, and a brew you created with your own hands. And it's enough. You wake before the bell. The abbey is still asleep, wrapped in mist and quiet like a sleeping cat. You pull on your cloak and step out into the cool morning air, guided by candlelight and the memory of Sister Gisela's words. Today, we offer the brew. You weren't sure what she meant at first. It sounded like a euphemism, maybe for mass, maybe for inventory, maybe for finishing the last bottle from last night's cask. But no, she was being entirely literal. Today, the beer goes on the altar. You make your way to the chapel. It's small, domed in stone, and laced with ivy that never quite gives up in winter. Inside, the windows catch the pale glow of dawn, coloring the space in muted pinks and grays. The nuns are already assembling. Their movements are silent, but not somber, more like the hush before a library reading or the final breath before a toast. You're handed a small clay jug. It's warm. Inside, your Pilgrim's Rest. You carry it carefully, hand steady, but heart thudding like a brewing vat during first boil. This isn't just ceremony, it's storytelling. This beer, made with your hands, your choices, is about to become part of something older and bigger than you. At the front of the chapel stands the abbess, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The altar is simple: linen cloth, a wooden crucifix, and a single silver chalice. You join the procession. One by one, the sisters pour their own brews, each different. There's a dark ale from Sister Agnes, rich with smoked apple peel. A floral mead from Gisela. Something suspiciously green from Eulalia. She winks at you and mouths nettle. It's a phase. Each pour is a chapter, a confession, a hope. Your turn comes. You step forward and slowly tip the jug. The ale flows into the chalice with a quiet glug, thick, golden brown, laced with flecks of cinnamon oil catching the light like tiny stars. Then you kneel. The abbess lifts the chalice. She doesn't drink, not yet. Instead, she begins to speak. Her words aren't scripted. They change with each offering. This time, she tells a story of a famine winter when the nuns brewed with lentils and bitter roots, and how they shared the brew with hungry families while hiding their own hunger behind cheerful smiles. Of the year, they made a healing beer with yarrow for the town's aching lungs. Of a barrel once stolen by a thief, only to be returned weeks later with a note. Please teach me. I want to do this right. Historians still argue whether medieval nuns imbued their brewing with spiritual ritual or if these traditions came later, born from nostalgia. But standing here, kneeling here, you feel the sacredness isn't in the records. It's in the repetition, in the choice to keep doing this, every season, every generation. And your quirky fact? In some early abbeys, the beer wasn't just used for feasting. It was also part of the anointing process during certain lesser-known rites, used symbolically to soothe the soul's edges. After the offering, the sisters sing, not the usual chant, but a soft hymn you haven't heard before. The melody is simple, circular. It wraps around the room like rising steam. You find yourself humming along. Then, the final moment, the sharing. The abbess raises the chalice and blesses it, and the cup is passed around, each sister sipping in turn. When it reaches you, your hands tremble, but only for a moment. You taste it. Warm, malty, slightly sweet with a cinnamon finish. Not perfect, but honest. And in that moment, you get it. This isn't just about beer. It's about care, about memory, about taking something perishable and making it last, not in the bottle, but in the story. The ceremony ends, but the afterglow lingers. You step outside into morning sunlight and feel, strangely, changed. You've brewed, you've learned, you've been initiated into a tradition stitched together not by grand pronouncements or declarations of mastery, but by quiet acts of devotion, daily work, shared knowledge, laughter in the fermenting room, and gossip by candlelight. Small things poured into something lasting. You find Sister Gisela in the herb garden trimming back the lemon balm. She hands you a clipping. Next batch, she says, try this. Great in a midsummer ale. You nod. You will. You return to the brew house one last time. It smells of yeast and old stone. A barrel thumps softly in the corner as it settles. You run your fingers along the edge of the copper kettle, still warm from last night's slow boil. And you leave a note. Not a recipe, not advice, just a sentence. I can't brew beer. I stayed because of you. The wind rustles the parchment slightly, then settles. And so do you. The room grows quieter now. You can still feel the faint hum of the abbey in your chest, the way soft footsteps echoed in cloister halls, the way steam curled like incense from kettles older than dynasties. The laughter, the stillness, the way time seemed to stretch there, not in rushing minutes, but in careful measures of grain and water. You breathe in slowly. Picture the nuns again, moving through their routines with quiet confidence, their habits dusted with flour, their hands stained with hop resin, their lives lived not for praise, but for purpose. The flickering candlelight, the rhythm of tasks, The way they brewed not just with skill, but with patience, humor, and something close to joy. Maybe that's what lingers most, the joy that hums beneath all the work. Gentle, subtle, persistent. As your eyes grow heavier, let your thoughts drift to that high stone wall enclosing the abbey garden, the scent of rosemary and barley rising in the morning mist. Let the soft tap of raindrops on stained glass lull you. Let the quiet voices fade into a hush. And remember, history isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a warm cup passed hand to hand in silence. So sleep now, traveler. The brew is finished. The story's told. And morning is far, far away.